Hi, my name is Priya and today I'm going to show you how to make a flat bottom cup. To make the cup, you're going to use about 1.5 pounds of clay. So it's going to be about like this. Bigger clay is going to make a bigger cup, but it's also just going to depend on how thin or how thick you make the walls. When I look at this cup here, I can see that it has a really wide flat bottom. And to do that, we're going to open it differently than we open a bowl. This one here is another example. It's a little narrower on the bottom, but we can see that it's really flat down there. When we open a bowl, we drill down, and it stays pretty round on the inside. We maybe scoop it out some, and then we lead from the inside. With the flat bottom cup, we're going to drill down, and then you're going to curve your fingers towards you, and so we're going to have a little corner down there. Then after we've opened up that corner, we'd maybe shape it so it leans inward a little more, and then you're going to pull up the sides, pushing from the outside. And then your inside hand is going to be in that little corner. This feels a little awkward holding it up there, but there we are. So, after we've made the cups, or after we've pulled up the walls, we can shape them a little bit. You can lean them outward with a rib, or you can use a technique called collaring, where you're going to bring it back in. So you might end up with a shape a little more like this in that case. As always, I'm going to start out by centering my clay. Got my kick wheel going nice and fast. And if you have a little patty of old clay on the bottom, you can stick your next piece of clay right on top, and that will help it stick. My clay is sealed on, and the next thing I'm going to do is apply equal and opposite pressure on both sides. I tend to use this back part of my hand and this part here at about 7 o'clock and 1 o'clock to squeeze together and gently come upwards, being really careful of this top point so that it doesn't turn into a volcano on top. When I'm working with a larger amount of clay, I'll usually use coning to center. If I have a small amount, sometimes I can skip that step. So we're going to skip coning today, and I'm just going to move ahead to using the back part of my hand to straighten this wall and the top to flatten it a little bit. So I'm using the back heel of my hand, and I'm anchoring it almost right in front of my belly button. And then the right hand is stabilizing the top and keeping it from turning into a cone again. If you have extra clay out here, sometimes it makes your hands bounce up and down. So I would scrape that off. Letting go really gently. And this isn't 100% centered, but I feel like I'm mostly straight here, I'm mostly flat on top, and I can move on to the next step without fussing over it too much here. And I can move on to the next step without fussing over it too much here. For opening, I'm going to try to keep really steady, even speed. I'm going to find the center. Lock my elbows into the sides of my body and go straight down. When I think I'm getting close to the bottom, I'm going to let go, stop my wheel, and check how deep this is. So this here is good. I want to be about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. This next step also you need the wheel going pretty fast for. So I'm gonna have my left hand out here, and then my right hand fingers are gonna curve towards me. So you're moving kind of a lot of clay at one time, and your fingertips are really digging right into the clay. So this also, we want to try to do it all in one easy movement. So there we have the flat floor. And before I do anything else, I'm going to compress the floor to avoid cracks later on and get rid of some of my finger marks on the bottom. So to do that, I'm going to rub my fingers back and forth a little bit. And I'm not really trying to make it any deeper. I'm just trying to flatten it and compress it a little more. The rotation of the wheel naturally makes the clay want to move outwards and into more of a bowl shape. So to make sure that this is going up rather than out, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to hug the sides in and angle it all a little more inwards. If you overcompensate at the beginning, it's a little easier to stay on track. Okay, so there we have everything's angled a little more inwards. And to pull up the walls, I'm going to hold my hands the same way I do for the bowls. So I'm going to have my left hand on the inside and then my right hand underneath on the outside. And what I'm going to make sure I'm doing is I'm pushing from the outside and leading inwards. But what we really want to do is we want to pull the weight out of the bottom without ending up really thin on top. So if you feel like you're getting thinner up there, gently loosen up pressure as you move upwards. I'm going to do one more pull, and then we're going to shape this a little bit. I'm going to cut off this extra clay down here. And I know I have a little more weight down there I can pull out. So maybe I'll do actually another pull. I'm switching to using my knuckle this time. Sometimes if you're moving more clay at a time, that's easier to stay stable than your fingertips. Okay, so I could just keep this as a mostly straight up and down cup. Another thing I might want to do is angle it outwards a little bit. So if I want to angle outwards, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my left hand on the inside and I'm just going to gently kind of stretch while I'm supporting the other side with my rib. Okay, so I feel like this is a pretty standard cup shape. Makes a nice cup. If I wanted to be about done with this one, I'd want to mop up the water on the inside. You might want to even off the top edge. And I like to shape my top edges so they angle inwards a little bit. So I'm going to hold on to this and just use my fingertip there to give it a nice shape. I feel like it's comfortable and also works nicely with the glazes a lot of the times. Have that slight bevel and angle on top. And then I would take this knife tool to get rid of this extra clay that I left behind at the bottom. I'd probably want to turn this on the wheel and trim it just a little bit on the bottom at leather hard to make sure it's really neat and doesn't have any sharp areas. But I could also say this cup is done as it is and just roll it a little bit at leather hard. But let's say this wasn't the shape that I wanted to make. I might want to even off the top edge. And I like to shape my top edges so they angle inwards a little bit. So I'm going to hold on to this and just use my fingertip there to give it a nice shape. I feel like it's comfortable and also works nicely with the glazes a lot of the times. Have that slight bevel and angle on top. And then I would take this knife tool to get rid of this extra clay that I left behind at the bottom. I'd probably want to turn this on the wheel and trim it just a little bit on the bottom at leather hard to make sure it's really neat and doesn't have any sharp areas. But I could also say this cup is done as it is and just roll it a little bit at leather hard. But let's say this wasn't the shape that I wanted to make. If I feel like this isn't the shape that I wanted to make, or if I was going for a different shape, I can maybe do something called collaring. So to collar, I'm going to put generally like thumb to middle finger on both hands, and that's going to really gently hold on to the clay and go from bottom to top and bring things back in. Clay is like a rubber band. It stretches out really easily, but it kind of clumps up sometimes and folds in on itself if you try to bring it in too fast. So collaring can be a little dangerous in that regard. So you don't want to see this whole thing crumple over on itself. So make sure you're being slow and gentle and you're using enough water that your hands don't stick. Okay, so I'm a little more straight up and down here. Let's say I want it to have a wider belly on the bottom. To do that, I'm going to push outwards with my inside hand, and I'm going to define the shape with a rib in my outside hand. So I believe the one in the student kits is this metal one. I personally like this red one a lot, but I'm just going to switch to this metal one since that's what I think you have. Okay, so stretching out the belly a little more from the inside. And maybe I like this shape done on the bottom, but I'm not sure about the top, or maybe you want to stabilize it just a little bit. So I can go in real gently and collar it a little more up here too. So before I cut this off, I want to make sure I'm paying attention to the shape of this top lip. Sometimes I use this tool here to define things a little more. Or you can just leave it a little looser, maybe put your chamois on it to smooth it out. But we want to make sure that's going to be smooth and comfortable for people to drink out of. Okay, again, this one I'd probably want to trim it a little bit on the bottom, but just enough to clean it up so it's neat and not a really deep trim like we do on the bowls. Got one last cut there. Hold my wire tool to cut it off. And make sure you don't have water sitting in the bottom. Water sitting in the bottom is a good way to get cracks later on.